light her up.
Over the years, Hollywood has portrayed the West of the late 1800s as being wild and woolly, and its lawmen as being some sort of superhuman hero. That's not all that accurate of a picture. I'm Lou Gallo.
And I'm Police Assistant Ronnie Nanning, and we're both from the Pasadena Police Department's Crime Prevention Unit. And in tonight's show, we're going to show you how your Pasadena Police Department got its start, where we've been, where we are at, and how we are endeavoring to serve you better.
Back in the 1800s, the area of the San Gabriel Valley that we now know as Pasadena was a sprawling farm community. There are several thoughts as to the origin of the word Pasadena, but the most accepted is that it's a Chippewa Indian word which means valley.
Due to its gentle climate and hospitable countryside, Pasadena began to grow into a sizable farming community by the mid-1800s. As this community grew, so did its need for additional services to its residents, and the peaceful little township of Pasadena was born. By now, small general stores and other merchandising establishments began to spring up along Pasadena's two main streets, Colorado Boulevard and Fair Oaks Avenue.
A growing town meant two things: lots of building and hard-working, thirsty men. Men with a need for recreation.
In November of 1884, an industrious young man decided to open a billiard parlor along Colorado Boulevard to assist in the recreational needs of these men. In just a few short weeks' time, though, he started to actually serve alcoholic beverages.
People of Pasadena were furious. They did not want a saloon.
Now stay out!
It was high time that the city of Pasadena became incorporated so that its residents could begin to govern and protect themselves. On June 16, 1886, the city of Pasadena was officially incorporated, and shortly thereafter, the sale of alcoholic beverages was declared to be illegal.
Now, it should be understood that the community did have a sort of police protection. Way back in 1874, it had a deputy sheriff whose responsibility it was to maintain the peace. In 1877, Albert O. Bristol was named the first constable of Pasadena, a post he served with dignity until incorporation in 1866. Then he assumed the position of police officer.
The infant city now had a sudden need for another police officer. Not that there was any great crime wave, just that there was a need for another officer to be hired, and so one was.
Imagine that. 2 police officers, one for daytime and one for at night. Now, it's no secret that in order to have a police department, you need men and a jail. Pasadena had both by 1896. The first jail was built in the southwest corner of Fair Oaks Avenue and Union Street. History records no one ever breaking out of this jail, but as far as that goes, it doesn't record anyone ever being in it either. The Pasadena Police Department, as we know it today, got its start in April of 1901. It was at this time that W.W. Freeman was appointed as the first chief of this still young department. Under his leadership, the department began to grow and manage its own budget. Officers earned $75 a month and had the pleasure of working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a 14-day vacation every year, if it wasn't too busy for them to take it.
At this point in our history, there were few ways to summon an officer if one was really needed. Officers generally walked a footbeat, which did not afford them the ability to cover a great deal of ground. Horses were used by police on rare occasions only.
In the absence of today's technology, the human spirit rose to the need of the people in the form of a congenial restaurant owner named Charlie Grimes.
If a citizen was in need of a police officer and found the city hall bare, he could run over to Grimes' restaurant on Fair Oaks. There he would inform good old Charlie of his plight. Charlie would race out into the street and loudly blow a whistle, thus summoning as many police officers as could hear his distress call.
Besides, where else could the long arm of the law reach out and grab onto a thick steak, plenty of potatoes, fresh vegetable, all the bread you can eat, a beverage, and dessert, and all for just 55 cents?
All seemed to be going well. Crime was not what it is today, although there was a rash of second-story burglaries for a while. By 1909, the department had grown in numbers and its ability to provide services to the community. It even sported a motorcycle officer to assist in the now beginning stages of traffic enforcement.
It was an era of improved communications, and the police department was not to be excluded. There was a system of call boxes installed throughout the city, enabling officers to call into the police station to report on the status of their area and to see if any requests had been made of them.
The year was 1910, and a new system of calling officers in the field was needed and installed. This was a system of red lights that were suspended throughout various intersections in the city. When an officer was needed, the desk sergeant turned on all the lights, and the officers would call in one by one for instructions. Otherwise, the officers called in every half an hour to check on the needs of his area. As the department grew, it became obvious that there was a need to keep better records of the happenings in it. In July of 1911, the Office of Police Secretary was established. It was the Secretary's duty to handle the payroll, pay the bills, keep the police reports and the prisoners' records. The initiation of paperwork had begun.
A mere month later, the Secretary had to record the first devastating blow to the young department. While at an address on North Broadway, which is now Royal Parkway, Officer Clarence E. Peck was accidentally shot in the chest when another officer's weapon fell from its holster. The two had been called to the location on a call of a fire and were in the process of putting it out when the accident occurred. 3 days later, Officer Peck died as a result of his injuries.
At that time, there were no provisions for the city to pay for his injuries, nor was there a fund to assist his widow or his young son. As a result of this incident, on July 1st, 1919, an excellent retirement plan went into effect for the officers, and it was the first one of its kind. Pasadena was leading the way in the caring for retired officers. The year was 1912, and crime was on the increase. It was then that the Detectives Division was formed. There wasn't a great deal of technical assistance to these officers. The job was usually accomplished by dogged persistence, good common sense, and plain old-fashioned luck.
But it is essential to remember that it has been, and still is, the man on the beat who makes the difference. It's on him that the duty falls, but not always the credit. The majesty of the law is epitomized by the man who oftentimes goes unnoticed.
It was also in 1912 that Mrs. Mary Ganser was appointed as the department's first jail matron. Her job was to keep the female prisoners separated from the males.
Shortly thereafter, in 1926, Mrs. Barry Johnston was appointed our first woman police officer, thus opening the doors for future female officers. Although the uniforms didn't change much, time passed rapidly for the members of the police department, and there were many unsung heroes over the years. Several chiefs had come and gone, but crime was still with us. It was on August 17, 1928, that our police department gained national attention in an incredible shootout and chase with two very dangerous bank robbers.
Shortly after the two men had robbed the Pasadena National Bank on North Fair Oaks, every red light in the city was turned on. Officers all over the city responded to the nearest call box. And as Lieutenant L.H. Harrison and Officer Fred Walker were at the call box at Colorado and Grand Avenue, they saw the suspect vehicle less than a block away.
The suspects first threw tacks out of their speeding vehicle in an effort to flatten the police car's tires. When that failed, they opened fire on the officers with pistols and a .30 caliber repeating rifle. While returning fire, Officer Walker was struck in the right hand, the neck, and the chest.
Off-duty officer Ralph Shadd heard all of the gunfire and picked up the chase in his own car with motorcycle officer Ewing behind him. Harrison pulled off the chase to take his wounded partner to the hospital, where Walker subsequently recovered from his wounds. Meanwhile, Shadd and Ewing continued the pursuit into South Pasadena.
There, the pursuit finally ended with one robber being shot to death and the other successfully taken into custody. All four officers were hailed as heroes and were rewarded for their bravery.
Innovations in police work were on the horizon, and Pasadena Police Department was on the cutting edge of the future. In 1930, Pasadena became one of the first police agencies in the country to utilize a new invention in its cars, the one-way radio. Police cars could now be equipped with a radio, making it easy for a dispatcher to contact an officer in the field without the delays that occurred with the red lights and call boxes.
We had just built a new police station in Court and called it the Hall of Justice. A division was started to deal with the increasing problem of juvenile offenders. It was called the Crime Prevention Unit, but functioned as our Juvenile Services section does today. Although this new station did have a jail, additional space was needed to house those convicted of crimes.
You know, it seems as though I've heard that those problems still exist today.
In 1940, the city built a prison camp at 1090 Glen Avenue. There, the prisoners were housed who had been convicted of committing misdemeanor offenses.
The inmates were there on the honor system with little security. Any attempt to escape meant immediate prison time. They did all their own cooking and cleaning and lived a very good life at the camp. Frequently, officers would hunt small game in the nearby Linda Vista Hills for the prisoners to cook for their meals. The camp was renamed the Jail Annex and was operated by police personnel until 1968. At that time, the jail was closed and the property converted to the city maintenance yards, which it still is today. Other changes took place in the 40s. The Police Reserve Unit was organized and still serves the department and the city. These volunteer officers work side by side with regular officers on patrol, as well as at major events such as the Tournament of Roses Parade and Rose Bowl events. We are also privileged to have reserve officers ride as mounted police units throughout the bridle paths in the city in an effort to keep them problem-free. In 1940, radio station KWKW sponsored a weekly 15-minute radio program hosted by members of the department that highlighted crime prevention and traffic safety tips. Another communications breakthrough occurred in the 40s. Certain police cars were equipped with three-way radios. Not only could dispatchers communicate with officers, but the patrol officers could now call the dispatchers and each other. This greatly decreased the time it took an officer to respond to the need of the citizens. The year was 1947, and a well-known Pasadenean was to make international headlines in the world of sports. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball and paved the way for many young black athletes who followed in his footsteps. But even before this great breakthrough, another young man broke that same color barrier on the Pasadena Police Department. On November 12, 1946, Ralph Riddle became Pasadena's first black officer. To discuss the changes that the police department has undergone, without mentioning the effect that the Tournament of Roses has had on it or the city, would be to neglect a powerful force within the city of Pasadena. The Tournament of Roses began way back in the 1890s and has since become one of the world's most famous New Year's celebrations. This celebration calls for a large number of officers to maintain the peace in the large crowds that gather to view this spectacular event. The combined efforts of all of the personnel of this and other assisting departments makes this event one of the greatest of its kind in the world. Just as the parade has changed over the years, so has the police department. Over the years, there have been a large number of advances in the department. Equipment has changed so rapidly that it is difficult to keep up with it at times. And with those changes come improvements in the service that the police department gives to the community. As we have seen, tools of the past give way to those of the present. We will undoubtedly see those things that we hold as state-of-the-art today give way to better and more efficient tools of the future. One change already underway is that of using more non-sworn personnel to handle police affairs. Since Albert Bristol's day, when a crime had been committed, the citizen knew that he or she would be seeing a police officer. There are many times now when a police assistant is sent to take a police report. These police assistants have many of the same responsibilities as sworn police officers, except they are not armed, nor are they sent into life-threatening situations. By sending the assistant, the department is freeing up an officer to patrol in an effort to prevent crime from occurring in the first place. Instead of having officers sitting at the front desk of the police station answering the phones or dispatching over the radio, emergency services operators are employed to do so, thus freeing up the officers for patrolling the city. We have covered a large time span in tonight's show, and as you can well imagine, it would take hours to tell of the many other events in our history. The Pasadena Police Department has come a long way in its 86 years, and there just isn't enough time to share all that we have learned in researching this interesting information. There is one statistic we would like to share with you. It's a bittersweet one for us. In the history of this department, there has only been one officer purposefully killed by a suspect in the line of duty. On March 3, 1969, Officer Richard Morris was shot and killed while serving the people of this community. It's to the memory of Officers Clarence Peck and Richard Morris. and to all those who have served this department over the years that we dedicate this program.
Thank you, and good night.